Hello there. All is well, thanks. How are you?
Good, good, good. Thank you very much for joining us and making the time um, spend the next hour with us. We will just wait a couple of more minutes for people to join, and then we'll officially start. Um,
Fantastic. Fantastic.
what time is it at your end of the world?
It's 11:30 a.m. So soon time. Yeah, I mean, we had a morning and
Yeah,
heading into the mid-noon. And you guys are 7:30.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You had your good day already.
We are ahead. Um, so good to have you, and thanks. Glad you can join us. I think we'll just start, and I'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we meet today and pay my respect to the elders past, present, emerging, and those who might be here with us. بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على عبدك ورسولك محمد صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعه بإحسانه إلى يوم الدين. Thank you very much for joining us, Robert. And for our audience, I'll just quickly introduce Robert. Robert has 2 decades of experience working with and supporting those who want to leave white power, neo-Nazi environmental extremists behind. He was the director of Exit Sweden for 10 years, and he was the program director of Exit USA for 3 years. Robert himself was involved in the Swedish neo-Nazi movement in his teens. Robert is internationally requested speaker, an expert in disengagement from far-right extremism, drawing on personal experiences to help others. So thank you very much, Robert, for joining us. In a nutshell, the program today is we hear so many things about Islamic extremism or Muslim extremism. We just want to hear the other spectrum of the narratives that are emerging, especially in Western countries, and the rise. Obviously, for us, it's also a learning curve for us on how we can disengage or help our young people and families and communities to engage from extremism or far right activities. So I'll just start, Robert, by inviting you to share or tell us a bit of your experience in your teens about extremism in Sweden. What made you join it? Those things that attracted you into that ideology, and what was the turning point for you in exiting that? So just share your experience with us. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to join this live stream. Unfortunately, online, but really, I'm really happy to be here with you. So when I look at my life and my experiences, and I think of what is it that made me join these type of environments, or how did I end up there? I think there's a few, I mean, really a range of different factors that I could identify as risk factors or things that affected my life in different ways. Um, it wasn't so that I woke up one day and I was active in the right-wing extremist groups, but it was really a gradual process with different factors. I think there's a few that I identified as more important. I think one of them was really a major school failure. When I grew up in inner city Stockholm in a middle class area, in a safe neighborhood, in a good uh, setting, but I had quite a lot of trouble in school. It just didn't go very well. The first years in Sweden, you start first grade at age 7. So the first 3 years was not so demanding or difficult, but once we came up to age 11, 12, class 4, 5, it became different and more. I simply noticed that it became more difficult. And fifth grade, especially, so age 11, 12, was really groundbreaking in many ways. I think, first of all, the school that I went to was going to renovate. So we moved to a different inner city school where we were mashed in together with hundreds of students who were already there. So it was a bit of a chaotic year, and there was quite a lot of conflicts during that year. And especially I came into conflict with a group of friends who were from a suburb who had migrant background, and I mean, we came into conflict over something really silly, that somebody skipped a line at some point, but it really escalated into something that became very unpleasant, and I was often alone, so none of my friends that I hanged out with or from my school was kind of involved in this, but it was really this big group of 10, 15 kids who kind of, as soon as we were on break, they kind of looked me up and they kind of stood around me, or they behaved in a threatful way. I think those experiences affected me in terms of kind of uncertainty or fear. But also school-wise, I had to redo fifth year because of poor academic achievements. And to redo a school year was really, I mean, it was really shameful, very difficult. I decided to change school because I didn't want to come back the year later and go with the ones who were 1 year younger and see my kind of friends that I went to school with for 5 years kind of moving on, and I'm still, you know, in one step behind. So it was really shameful. I think a very difficult experience for me. So I changed school. At that point, I was also quite big in terms, I grew a lot. So I was a head taller than my friends, and then, you know, I went down 1 year. So it was really like a big physical difference. And the first week of second year in fifth grade, one of my classmates wondered if I was an intern from ninth grade, or like what was I doing there. So I just felt I didn't fit in in so many ways. It was really, I mean, it was a horrible experience in so many ways. And academically, fifth grade didn't go very well, and sixth grade either. So I think I just zoomed out. I just lost interest and just didn't really participate or care very much. So here I really see the change in my life, that I started to adopt a subculture. Um, I started to go into different type of styles. I have two elderly siblings who were into heavy metal, so I went into listening to that too, and I started to listen to death metal and black metal and these type of music, and I think they really resonated with my emotional status. That it was really dark, it was really angry, it was I mean, it was not very happy lyrics, and I think it really resonated with how I felt. That I was really angry and upset and felt powerless and unfairly treated and all these things. But it on the other hand, it really gave me kind of a sense of who I was and how I could, you know, how could I carry my identity and my life in a different way. And I kind of felt very comfortable of having this identity. Uh, Parallel with this, I also just a few years later I got involved with some elderly friends in football supporter environments, and I've always been sporty and like to do sports, but I never really looked at sport up until that point. But they convinced me to join to the football stadium, which was really also a very powerful experience of being part of a mass crowd of 3,000-4,000 people who cheered and chanted, and this type of emotional experience of being in a mass was really powerful. And I was 14 or something, so I mean, quite young and vulnerable in a sense of kind of understanding or being able to um, perceive these type of things or processes. So it was more the experience that it was really, really fun. And that culture was a lot about being a macho, tough guy, and nobody should sit on you. You know, you drink and you fight, and this type of lifestyle. And I felt it was very attractive. I had a lot of rage and frustration, and here was an environment where I could also kind of get this, get and I mean, process this in a sense that I could. I mean, I was angry and frustrated simply. And then I think the last element here is really the radicalization into these ideas, which came, I think, from three different kind of parts. One was the experience in school, but also in youth centers, because I had similar experience in youth center that you would have suburb gangs who predominantly were immigrant or second, third generation immigrant who came into middle class areas in Stockholm, and they weren't always making trouble, but it was kind of a threatful attitude. They were I think just different in the way of taking space than me and my kind of Swedish middle class friends were, who are usually, I mean, not very confrontative or very. I mean, we're Swedes are quite a soft type of culture. So I think there was a lot of clashes there, and it created uncertainty and fear. So I mean, I think that's one part. The second part is then the subcultures where I got introduced to different type of ideas, where also in the football environment I got in touch with both like a Viking promoting type of subculture, that Vikings are cool and they're masculine and they fight and they drink and they conquer and this type of ideal. And then the third aspect is really the school, which was just a big failure. Seventh to ninth grade was just not very good. The school did all kinds of interventions, and they just didn't really work very well. I went to the small group and I didn't really fit there, and they put me up 1 year from seventh to eighth grade to see if it worked better if I was with my year. So I mean, there was a lot of different things that the school tried, but what happened is that late ninth grade, it's identified that I need glasses, so that I have a vision fault. And I think this also was a bit of kind of frustrating to get at that point and to receive after 9 years of failure and bad self-esteem and frustration and conflicts and everything. I think that just also became a bit of the tip of it, that I felt I don't really have a lot to care about. So I think that was really part of what made me join this type of group.
Yeah. Well, certainly, Robert, there seem to being a lot of missed opportunities at school in terms of identifying and interventions. And that's a common experience that we have with a lot of the young people we work with in here, especially in school settings, where it might not be right-wing or violent extremism, but the risk could be issues of gang-related violence and young people seeking identity through an alternative identity, so a third identity. They are neither here nor there, they're citizens of nowhere, and then they have formed their own identities. And that's what we see, when you were talking about the school struggles, the music and the subculture at the youth center. This seemed to be a drive or determinants that engage young people, because they haven't been identified and the supports that were to be offered to them haven't been provided in time to divert them from this risk or unsocial behaviors. So you have gone on that side. What made you decide to come on this other side, and drove you to then share your experience and learnings to help others who might be going through or at risk of going through same experience?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think similar to the way in, the way out was not. It wasn't one event that affected that, or it wasn't one thing that changed. I didn't wake up one day and feel that I wanted to leave, but it was also multiple factors that affected this together. I was active for quite a lot of years, and what I think changed during those years was also my understanding of the environment and the ideology. When I went in, I mean, I didn't really know a lot. I wasn't very educated. I just got my glasses, and I was really kind of immersed in in the kind of propaganda that I got through the music or the magazines or through stickers or such. But as I got my glasses and I got engaged, I started to read quite a lot and really try to understand the ideology and what we were supporting. And I think for me it was a very strong link to identity. I felt that this was my identity. This is who I was. So, meaning it was very important. This type of ideas and how I was perceived by others. So I decided to go in. I started to read a lot of ideology and kind of understood the ideas. And in the beginning, it was a lot of being on town and kind of looking angry and dangerous and kind of having this type of activity in the groups or wanting to promote myself in this way. But as I read more, understood more of the depth of the ideology, I think it also changed. We drank a lot, for example, in the group. We partied a lot and were out on town and got into fights with all kinds of people. And I think once I really got immersed in the ideology and understood the different aspects, I felt that this is not really what we're not really promoting the elite life that the ideology is saying. I mean, quite rather the opposite. So for me, there was a change when I stopped drinking fully. I started working out. I started to read even more ideological propaganda and books, and I really focused on becoming a good ideological figure. And what I think happened then is that it became a bit of a difference from my friends who didn't want to stop Friday partying, and I started to see things that I think a bit different. So some of my friends were into steroids to become big and strong and being good at street fighting, but the problem with steroids is that we also know that it gets you the risk of being infertile, so you cannot breed more white babies, which is the whole essence of the cause, to have a lot of white babies inhabiting the world or people. So I saw these type of things. I had friends who were still into the hooligan type of violence, where usually white Swedes would fight other white Swedes over a football team, and it just didn't really make sense to how can this be important or superior when we are talking about our cause that's so important. So I think there was a lot of things that kind of got me puzzled with the environment. But my motivation was to join the military, to get military service and prepare for what we saw as some type of coming revolution. So I decided to keep a more low profile. I stopped hanging out in Friday, Saturday parties, and I kind of was a bit more careful with what type of events I was active in publicly, to really go into the military, where I think a lot of things actually changed. Because once in the military, I think I got quite disconnected from the movement, and I felt I'm not sure that this really makes sense, that this is what I want to do. And it wasn't so that my views changed initially, but rather that I got fed up with the environment, and I felt that this is not the Swedish elite that's going to change the world, but rather kind of a bunch of sad people that's not going to help us to create a change. But once out of the movement or the kind of the activities of the group, it also slowly shifted, that the views didn't become as important. It wasn't so. I think I stopped identifying as this type of individual or with the identity, but instead I could build up something in the military to be a good soldier and to be motivated and to push myself, and training for a military is a lot about self-awareness, self-consciousness, self-motivation to kind of build up yourself. So I think that was really helpful at that point. I think it came very timely in many ways. So I think that was really some of the steps that kind of turned me to actually leave. And the last point was really that I got in touch with Exit Sweden, which was quite new at that time. This was just before the shift of the millennium, so quite a long time ago. Exit was a newly set up organization. I didn't know about it, but I got in touch with it through one of my acquaintances who introduced.
And you later on worked there for 10 years. So we'll I just want to take a little bit back for our audience, remind our audience if you've got questions for Robert, just flick through and we'll ask Robert. I'll just take you back, and you mentioned briefly there the far right, white power and neo-Nazi groups. What is the central message or motive or ambition in terms of, and you've mentioned sustaining the white race, and in Australia we had history of the White Australia policy where it was preserving the Australia as a white nation. But in modern right-wing neo-Nazi groups, what is their central message? And is there hate, for example, just towards Muslims or migrants or a specific group, or it's across the board for those who are seen as being non-white?
So I think if we look at, it's really a diverse environment. If we look at the violent far-right extremism today, it's a shift from 20 years ago to how the environment looks today. And you have much more of a variety of different orientations that gathers within this type of label. But what usually unites them is really, the resistance against multiculturalism, against foreigners or migrants or refugees, to in a sense preserve the country or the culture. They use a few different terms: culture, country, race, to preserve this as pure, what they see as pure, so meaning white. And this is usually what combines these groups very strongly. And the enemies can really, or the target groups that they're against can change or shift. Usually it's generally against people who are not white. But it can also be specific target groups as Muslims or Jews, different political orientations that doesn't support the same ideas as communists or socialists or capitalists, liberalists. So in a sense, they're really against everybody who's not with them, which is usually quite a small number of people. But they're against all types of groups or people or orientations. And when we look at the violence, there's two types of violence, I would say. One is the kind of spontaneous, non-planned violence that happens on streets or usually Friday, Saturday evenings on town, that can really target everyone who happens to be around the group or that they get in conflict with. And then there's another target group, which is really the more ideologically motivated target groups, meaning people of color, people of different sexual orientations, people of different religious communities, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, so people who are not people who are seen as kind of enemies in these environments.
Yeah. So the others who are missing, and I think it's a trend, unfortunately, that's emerging or emerging in recent times. I think it's fueled to some extent by some of the commentary by some of the conservative political leadership in either Europe, in Australia certainly, and some parts in America as well. So, to us, that seems to legitimize some grievances, and I think it's the same that we have seen with some of the radical groups who might use our religion to drive an agenda and pick specific incidents to justify their motives. So what was the biggest obstacle in disengaging either yourself or broadly, commonly, if people want to disengage with these extremist environments or groups? And you've mentioned before Exit Sweden. How do they help people exit from there and come back to integrate into society?
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to the biggest obstacles, I think there are a few different, and we can differ between the internal and the external, where the internal is your own process of change. Once you get involved in these groups, I think it's a bit similar to a cult, that you de-evaluate everything that comes from the outside. You distrust everyone who's not part of the group. You will get trained in a way to think of other people as weak or enemies or not trustworthy. So the internal process is really to work through where you are and why, what is the motivation to leave. And then the external part or obstacles is linked to a few different, I think both the kind of practical aspects of how safe is it for me to leave the group? Can I stay in my neighborhood or do I need to move? How's my experience with work or studies? Kind of how integrated am I in society? But also the relation with society. So how is society open to also reconnect with people who lead these type of groups? Naturally, most people in society are a bit skeptical to engage with people who are leaving extremist groups of all type of ideological orientation. So I think we can see a few different challenges, but obviously also they're violent groups. I mean, they're groups that promote violence to harm others. So if you've been in this group and you know what capacity the group has, you would also understand that if I decide to leave, this could very well target myself.
Yeah.
So I think we can look at a few different kind of areas here when we look at obstacles and disengagement. But these are some for sure.
It's interesting that you mentioned humanizing others as a core strategy to bring people into and keep them into hate groups, for lack of a better word. With globalization, increased migration to the West, do you believe right-wing extremism poses an increased threat today? And if so, how do we tackle this problem?
And when we look at the right-wing extremist group today, it seems that they have gained a lot of attention and that they've grown in numbers and support. I think from a few different perspectives. One is that if we look at the 20-year perspective, there are more people who seem to be active in this group or who consume material or propaganda from these groups than previous. So the groups have actually managed to recruit more people. The other part is also that, and I think this was already 10 or 15 years ago, there was an article in The Guardian in the UK who identified that a lot of the far-right extremist groups, they understand that it's going to be difficult for them to gain full power. So they understand that after the Second World War, neo-Nazi ideas are difficult to get into kind of highest position of power. So a lot of them focused on also influencing other parties near them. So in a sense, changing the policies of parties who are close to them in different ways. And I think we can see this, the shift of policies towards migration, for example, in a range of different countries and from a range of different parties, that there's a change. And this according to this Guardian article, at least, was kind of a strategy that some of these groups had. So I think we can see that it poses an increased threat. And also when it comes to violence, that we've seen over the last 10 or so years, and I mean, in your part of the world, specifically with a horrible terrorist attack in the Christchurch. I mean, we see also the increase of motivational violence from these groups that they promote. That society is so decadent; it has gone so far down in multiculturalism and mixture that it's not possible to change with politics, but we have to accelerate this to create change and promote either revolutions or terrorist attacks.
Yeah. Exactly, and I think the point that you made in terms of you know these groups coming to the realization that they're not going to form a government, because we live in an interconnected world where you can't exist in isolation. But if you want to have a relation, there's a lot of economical connections. People, countries have to trade with other countries. There's travel, there's tourism, there's a lot of things. And then they seek to appropriate conservative political narratives so that they provide a facade of legitimacy for the radical political agenda. And I think where the vacuum of discourse on this issue when it comes to white neo-Nazi extremism was the lack of discourse or conversations in the broader mainstream settings. For example, it was Islam or Muslims, there was an expectation that the Muslim community will distance themselves from such groups or attacks. In fact, there was some expectations that the Muslim community will speak out against events that might have happened at the other end of the world, because it has got Islamic extremism or Islamic radicalization. But when it comes to white extremism and right-wing extremism, there was lack of discourse, even describing them as extremists, because there's this struggle definition that terrorism is to achieve political outcome through violence and motivated by religion. To a point where in Australia, in the current context now, we have a right-wing risk of terrorism outweighing terrorism that might be motivated by a religion. So I think, from my perspective at least, and in the context of Australia, I think we are a bit late coming to the table to have a conversation about the right-wing extremism as a form of violence or political violence, and that can lead to terrorism. And as you rightly pointed out, the Christchurch example is sadly one that we can all relate to. But right-wing extremism doesn't happen in any vacuum. It happens in schools, in communities, in families. So what is the role, or what role does family and community play in de-radicalization and disengagement and interventions? How can community organizations appeal to individuals who are on the path of radicalization? So basically, what can we as a family, communities, organizations do to support those who are at risk of radicalization, or those who want to disengage from radicalization?
One of the most common challenges that I met with my work with family support, so supporting families whose children are radicalized into violent far-right extremism, is that they describe the difficulty to reach. Their children are changed in different ways. They don't recognize them. They become very aggressive. They become confrontational, and they are very. They're usually described as a bit of brainwashed by the elderly, and they kind of come back to certain things that they repeat over and over and over, and also that all discussions simply just narrow down to ideology. So whatever they're discussing at the dinner table or weekend evenings or whatever, everything simply just narrows down to always addressing ideology. And for people around these individuals, it's very frustrating because you feel the difficulty of reaching through. You become very frustrated. And if we think of ourselves, all of us, when we go into arguments with people that we don't agree with, it usually evokes emotion, and we become upset, and especially when it comes to family and loved ones, and even our children. So how do we manage this frustration or this confrontation? And I think here one of the main parts is to try to help the child to not get more disconnected. Because this is usually what we see, that once individuals start to embrace these ideas, even 13, 14, 15, so young children, when they start to embrace these ideas, the response is usually either attack, how can you think like this? This is horrible, you shouldn't do this. you're a bad person. So this type of condemnation. And the other part is isolation, that you withdraw. Oof, I don't want to have anything to do with this crazy ideas or individuals, so this is too radical, or I don't understand this. So I think this is usually the most common things that we see. And we know that this is not helpful. If somebody is in a place of hurt or difficult emotions, seeking identity, feeling lost, we know that abandoning them is not going to help them to reconnect with society, reconnect with new friends, reconnect with family, but rather the opposite. This will help the isolation, the kind of the sense that I'm alone, nobody cares. So it's all about connection, all about keeping connection, not pushing into isolation, but instead thinking, how can we try to instead increase connection with other people. I think if we think of it as kind of a scale, like a ancient scale where we measure different things, if we put a lot of positive input for the individual in the extremist bowl, then this is going to be more important for the person, and it's going to be more difficult to reach. And what we have to do is to balance this out so that we, in a sense, create more connections, more input, which is usually counterintuitive for most people. For most people, when they see people who join extremist groups, they take a step back. They feel this is not, I don't want to have anything to do with this. So here, communities, families play an extremely important role in staying connected, in really trying to come with alternative input, and even we know that it's difficult to discuss, just to stay in touch, just to check in, to show sincere concern about how are you, what's happening, and as much as possible try to avoid the ideological discussions, because those you won't really change somebody by going into discussing if this or that aspect of the ideology or politics is right. It's not how this works. You're not going to change people that way. But really to stay connected and to think of how can we empower growth, change? How can we connect with other positive resources? I think from my practice, I saw good examples when, for example, elderly family members were engaged and started to have some type of mentorship relation with a young vulnerable person, and that type of things seem to help, and try to identify other good environments that simply is helpful and that creates change instead of disconnection and push people further away into isolation.
Yep. So stay connected and open communication are the key messages there. And I think you're right, Robert, in a sense that these groups often rely on isolating the person and creating that us and them mentality where there are two different camps. Those who are brainwashed by the main society and are naive enough to open the country for people who will flood in and then take over, and there won't be any white race. So having that open communication and staying connected provides that opportunity for family, community, and schools at least to engage that person once they're in a space, but also not just file make it a self-fulfilling prophecy that actually you see it's us versus them, and there's two camps in that. And speaking of being connected and open communications, obviously in this part of the world and in many parts of the world we've got coronavirus, and in Victoria where we are based, we are on the 6th lockdown, the longest. So we are heading to the 300 days in lockdown. Do you think that, in your view, this pandemic, the COVID pandemic and related lockdowns, and especially this debate about the vaccination and the conspiracies in relation to that, has increased the risk of young people joining far-right movements in this new climate of lockdown and being disengaged from family, schools, and other activities that normally we would be connected with as a collective community.
I'm sorry, I lost the sound for the last part. Can I just ask you to
So in essence, is there an increased risk of people being attracted to, since we're more online because of the lockdown, and there's a lot of conspiracy against vaccinations.
Okay, good. Thanks. I got you. I think, I mean, what we see already since the beginning of the pandemic is alarming reports over increased radicalization because of a range of different reasons. First of all, most people spend their days online. So they spend a lot of time online in different forums or different activities. And a lot of the right-wing extremists or all types of extremist groups identify this as an opportunity to engage with people, because it's different to come to a school or to a youth club or to be on town to recruit people, and it's much more easy for these groups to engage in one-to-one communication with people in online forums where you can be anonymous and you can say things a bit differently, or you can shift your propaganda in a more manipulative type of way. So we really see an increase. And I think that the pandemic really imposed isolation, uncertainty, and fear, which is really elements for polarization and radicalization. One of the trends we saw, for example, is an increased radicalization or recruitment in online gaming forums. So forums that's dedicated to discuss games of different sorts, where a lot of young people spend a lot of their time. And the radicalized groups identify that here we have an online youth club where we can have free access to people. And I think one of the challenges is that there's usually no, if you think of a youth club, at least there's usually trained staff there who works, and they engage with people, and they identify and monitor, and they see who comes in and who's out and what happens. But in these forums, there's no type of overview or we simply lack this type of engagement from adulthood or from social workers and etc. So I think the pandemic and the issue of lockdown has really been an opportunity for extremist groups, and also the last point is because of the uncertainty of this. So if we think of all the ranges of conspiracy theories or perceptions of why this is happening and who is responsible and what happens if you take vaccine and what is the real reason for these lockdowns? I mean, it's also just a gold mine for extremist groups to dig into and to look at. Look here, what we see with all these politicians who want to control our life, and they want you to take a shot, or they want you to stay at home, or they want to control you in different ways. So, I mean, these groups really had a lot of benefits with this development, and they're trying to capitalize on it as much as possible.
Yeah. And Robert, you're right. I think extremist groups, whether they come and use a name in the name of religion or national or flag or identity, often look for things that justify their worldview, and often feed people of conspiracy theories. We see reports where people refer to other peoples, and I think with us Muslims, we've got additional grievances. Often when a Muslim person does something, and I think the mainstream media is sometimes guilty of this, the person's ethnicity or religion is mentioned, if they are from other multicultural communities or ethnic groups, whereas if it's from mainstream white person, it's often limited to the individual's name and that. And a lot of young people from our communities are quite upset about that. And that, again, is being used by certain groups to say, you see, that them and us mentality again kicks in and says, you see, the white man is always the white person, who often has mental health issues or other issues, but when it comes to a Muslim or someone of ethnic background, it's often the whole community is expected to apologize, the whole community is expected to defend their faith or culture. So do you think, there's two elements. One is the broader community, and one is the communities that are target of these hate groups. When we are then facilitating cross-cultural dialogue on far-right extremism, what do you think is helpful in terms of the conversations of having migrant communities having with established or broader mainstream Anglo-Saxon community? What is helpful in engaging that dialogue? We are the victims of right-wing, and the broader community is victims of people who might use our religion to harm and drive. How do we then create a conversation between the broader community, not just focus on what the radicals are doing on both sides?
This is a crucial point, because it's about connectivity once again, to connect and to understand the other parts. So understanding how does this affect the other communities or the other groups. And I think, this type of initiative that you are doing now to publicly discuss, I think is helpful to create understanding and to get message out to more people. How is this affecting our community? What are we able to do, and what can we do together? Because these groups really feed on polarization. They feed on distance, on creating distrust of this connection between groups and communities. And what we usually see is helpful if we want to counter this is to create more connectivity and more connection. So to meet and to understand and to hear the other persons. Usually we're quite bad at this. People in general are not really interested in to understand what the other people are thinking or doing. And this comes to politics or religion or all kinds of groups, that we're more interested in supporting our own ideas and to promote our own thoughts that we already support, or to discuss this with people who already support it. So this is really a challenge for all of us to be more interested and to be more open and active in seeking knowledge from other groups and from other parts and other perspectives, to widen the understanding and to see where the similarities are and where the connections are, and what can we do together, instead of saying that you guys should do this or this only happens to those people. And instead to see how can we as a society come together.
Excellent. And we've got one question via text. It says, is there disparities between genders on joining white, neo-Nazi or extremist groups? Are boys more susceptible to this, boys and men more susceptible than women? Or does this phenomena impact on both genders equally?
Mm-hmm. When we look at
more men and boys who are radicalized than women.
Mm. No, I understand. I think the gender perspective in radicalized right-wing extremist groups is an important and interesting perspective, because we see that the majority of members are usually males. And if we look at the ideas and the ideology, they also promote very kind of gender conservative type of ideas or perspectives. If we look at just look at a lot of the propaganda, men are the ones who are in control, in center. They're the leaders. They're the heroes, the fighters. And in a lot of the sentence, we see that females are portrayed as backing up the men, as supporters, as kind of taking care of the family, obviously breeding a lot of white children. So in that sense, only looking at it from the outside and the propaganda, it's quite clear how life for female in these groups are, and how the gender distribution is in these type of groups. So it's really male dominant, which I think comes to a lot of these. If we think of similarities between violent extremist groups or criminal gangs or similar type of groups, that they're usually quite male dominant because of the kind of the idea that men have a more central role and should be more in control and power. And what's also interesting then is how this affects members, that once people are involved in these groups, they also get more in tune and learn these type of perspective, which we really see when it comes to also supporting the exit from violent right-wing extremist groups, that a lot of the females who leave describe the difficulty of not being taken serious when they were in the group, and once they leave, not either being taken serious as actually have been active, but more seen as a girlfriend or a partner, and not really an extremist themselves, which just doesn't really mirror the reality or their lived through experiences. And I have cases I work with both in Sweden and in the US of individuals who were highly intelligent, females who were having perhaps not formally but informally leading positions, and when they left, they felt that they weren't really perceived as real formers, real extremists disengaging, but really met with the perception of being girlfriends or partners rather.
Yeah, and on the issue of intelligence, people make a lot of assumptions that people who join extremist right-wing extremists or neo-Nazis are not well educated. They're stupid. They're all kind of comments. But I think in reality there are some smart people who are also join those groups. Correct?
I think if we look at both the research and the practice of radicalization, there's a range of different factors that influence why people join these groups. Most of them are connected to the lived through experiences, just what I shared in my personal experiences. So lived through experiences that affects you to go into, I think, needing something specific, so needing group, identity, belonging, but also cutting off other type of inputs, so really isolating yourself in this type of bubble. So I think there's quite a lot of research that simply devaluate the perception that this is about either intelligence or education or class or such, but it's really more focused on both the social environments and the identity shaping environments. One researcher, for example, focused on the role of significance. So what type of meaning-making processes can we see when people join these groups? Well, they form meaning from their lived-through experiences. If they've been victims of violence or they have different type of difficult experiences, these groups, and I think this really ranges through all type of violent extremist groups, these environments then make meaning of those experiences and helps them to explain, why did this happen to you? How are you affected? And most of all, what can you do about it? Don't be a victim, have agency, take control, do something about it. So I think these perspectives might be more kind of helpful to look at or to understand when we look at radicalization.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Robert. It's fascinating. We came to the end to the 1 hour. So just flew the hour, but it's so refreshing to hear. We often work with young people who are either in the criminal justice system or at risk of being drawn into radicalization from the other spectrum, not from the right wing. So you're sharing your experience, lived experience, but also your expertise in the area has been quite helpful. I think for us the key message is stay connected, keep the channel of communications, do not isolate the individual, and collectively as a community, families, schools, and organizations need to work together to create an alternative pathway or platforms for young people to engage in a positive, even if they have grievances, to engage with the community in a positive setting. That just doesn't shut them off, but also creates an opportunity for them to stay in a safe environment. Any final comments, Robert, from you?
Well, I think you summarized it very well. I think staying connected is the key message here to help young people not to isolate in these groups, but rather to strengthen connections, and to also, I mean, think of what we can do together to see that this is not somebody else shouldn't do this, but what can we do? What is our role, and how can we work? So it's been a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And
Great, thank you very much, Robert. We really appreciate your time. You got up early to join us, so thank you very much. We will be uploading this, and we'll create links to your wonderful TED video, so that people can hear a bit more about your history and background. But really appreciate it. It's been very valuable opportunity to hear from you. Again, thank you very much for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Yeah, okay. All the best. Thanks.